The convoy leaves the lot in staggered pairs, 90 seconds apart, headlights cutting fog along Highway 30. 23 vehicles, 68 agents. 2 ambulances trailing at the rear, per Homeland Security Investigations Protocol updated in March 2026. The target is a beef processing facility with roughly 1,900 workers across 3 shifts. The warrant on the front seat of the lead Suburban is not an administrative I-213 notice. It is a federal criminal search warrant, sealed until execution, signed the night before by a magistrate judge in the District of Nebraska. That distinction matters more than almost anything else in what follows. A criminal warrant means the company itself is the subject, not the workers. The workers are witnesses, evidence, and later, deportees. But the case file that opened this raid has a corporate defendant listed on page 1. That is the shift. Quiet, technical, and enormous. For most of the last decade, Worksite immigration enforcement moved in fits and starts. A raid here, a fine there. Under the Biden administration, large-scale Worksite operations were formally deprioritized in an October 2021 memo signed by then-Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, which redirected resources toward what the department called unscrupulous employers. Enforcement did not stop. It slowed. Numbers dropped. Then, in early 2025, the second Trump administration reversed the memo within 72 hours of inauguration. By spring 2026, something new was being built inside the Homeland Security Investigations Directorate at 512th Street Southwest in Washington. Internal planning documents reviewed by CNN in June described a scale-up targeting agriculture, construction, meatpacking, hospitality, and light manufacturing. One official called it ambitious. That was an understatement. The documents laid out a staffing surge, a caseload target, and a new coordination structure between HSI, the U.S. Attorney's offices, and the Department of Labor's Wage and Hour Division. They also laid out a criminal probe pipeline that had already grown substantially. Federal prosecutors had opened more employer-focused investigations in the first 5 months of 2026 than in all of 2024. The pivot was not rhetorical. It was procedural. Which brings us back to the gravel lot outside Grand Island. At 4:58 a.m., the lead Suburban rolls up to the plant's east gate. A second team is already positioned at the west truck bay. A third has stacked at the employee entrance on the north side, where the shift change happens at 5. The supervising agent is a 15-year HSI veteran, called here Special Agent Ramon Delgado, a former Marine who runs the Omaha Field Office's Worksite enforcement group. He has done this before. He has never done it at this scale. At 5 a.m. exactly, the doors open. Agents move in 3 columns. The plant's night shift supervisor is served with the warrant at the security desk. Within 4 minutes, all production lines are ordered stopped. Within 11 minutes, every worker on the floor is directed to the cafeteria, where identity documents are collected and run against DHS databases on ruggedized tablets. The tablets ping green, yellow, or red. Green means cleared. Yellow means further review. Red means detention. By 6:42 a.m., 274 workers have pinged red. But the raid is not really about them. In a small glass-walled office on the mezzanine level, 2 HSI agents and an assistant U.S. attorney are executing the second half of the warrant. They are seizing servers, payroll records, I-9 forms, E-Verify audit logs, and the personal laptop of the plant's Human Resources Director. The supporting affidavit alleges a scheme under 8 U.S.C. Section 1324, harboring, and 18 U.S.C. Section 1546, document fraud, with an additional count under 18 U.S.C. Section 1956, money laundering, based on wire transfers routed through a staffing subcontractor in Texas. The dollar figure attached to the alleged scheme, per the affidavit, is $41.6 million over 4 years. That is the number that changes everything for the company. Not the 274 workers, the 41 million. The question of why worksite enforcement moved back to the center of federal strategy after years of street-level operations comes down to efficiency. Street arrests produce one removable individual at a time, often after hours of surveillance and vehicle pursuit. A single worksite raid can produce hundreds of encounters in a single morning, plus a criminal case against an employer whose conviction can reshape hiring practices across an entire industry. HSI leadership described it in an April 2026 memo as leverage per hour. The phrase caught on internally. It also leaked. Why 2026 specifically has a more layered answer. Detention capacity had expanded. Congress appropriated $28.9 billion for ICE operations in the fiscal year 2026 continuing resolution passed in December 2025, roughly 40% over the prior year. New detention contracts came online in Louisiana, Texas, and a reopened facility outside Leavenworth, Kansas. The pipeline could finally absorb a mass encounter operation without collapsing. In 2019, a series of raids in Mississippi netted 680 arrests at 7 poultry plants on a single August day. The detention system was overwhelmed within 72 hours. Children were released without their parents. Congressional hearings followed. Local churches ran a shelter out of a gymnasium in Forest, Mississippi, for weeks. The 2026 architecture was built to avoid that outcome. Whether it succeeds is a separate question. Why criminal cases against employers, when civil fines are faster, comes down to precedent. A civil fine, even a large one, is absorbable. A federal indictment is not. When Agri-Processors was prosecuted after the 2008 Postville, Iowa raid, its CEO, Sholem Rubashkin, received a 27-year sentence, later reduced to time served after commutation. The company was sold in bankruptcy. Every corporate general counsel in the meatpacking sector read the case file. That is the model being revived, not the arrests, but the aftermath. Back inside the Grand Island plant, the aftermath begins in the cafeteria. The 274 workers flagged red are split into 2 groups. Roughly 190 are placed in expedited removal proceedings under 8 U.S.C. Section 1225b(1), the section that allows removal without a hearing before an immigration judge for individuals who cannot show 2 years of continuous physical presence. The rest are routed to detention pending notice to appear filings. 3 workers claim fear of return. They are separated for credible fear interviews under 8 U.S.C. Section 1225b(1)(a)(2). 12 turn out to be U.S. citizens or lawful permanent residents whose paperwork simply took longer to verify. They are released by 9:15 a.m., some crying, some furious, one of them recording video on a phone that will be online before noon. The buses arrive at 10:04 a.m. 2 are contract vehicles operated by Geo Transport. 1 is a Homeland Security bus with tinted windows. Workers are loaded in sequence, wrists zip-tied in front, ankles unrestrained per updated 2025 policy for nonviolent administrative detainees. The buses depart for a staging facility in Grand Island, then convoy south toward a processing center in El Paso. Total time from doors open to buses rolling, 5 hours, 4 minutes. 40% faster than the 2019 benchmark. Think about what that means operationally. A workflow that once took 12 hours now takes 5. A raid that once required 140 agents can be run with 68. The math of enforcement changed because the infrastructure changed. Outside the plant, by mid-morning, a crowd has formed. Family members, local pastors, a state senator from District 35. A reporter from the Grand Island Independent stands in the parking lot with a notebook, counting buses. A woman called here Maribel Ortega, whose husband works the second shift and is not inside but will be terrified to come home, is on her phone with a legal aid attorney out of Omaha. The attorney tells her to gather documents, school records, utility bills, anything that establishes physical presence.
She writes it all down on the back of a grocery receipt. That grocery receipt is the other half of this story, because for every criminal case filed against an employer, dozens of civil consequences ripple outward through households that had nothing to do with the alleged scheme. The legal framework being deployed is not new. What is new is the volume and the coordination. Section 274 of the Immigration and Nationality Act, codified at 8 U.S.C. Section 1324, has criminalized harboring and employment of unauthorized workers since 1952. Section 274A, added by the 1986 Immigration Reform and Control Act, made it a civil offense for employers to knowingly hire unauthorized workers and required the I-9 verification system. E-Verify came in 1996, initially as a pilot. None of these tools are unused. What HSI's 2026 planning documents describe is stacking them, combining criminal harboring charges with money laundering, wire fraud, and in some cases, RICO predicates, to build cases large enough that plea negotiations reshape entire corporate structures. The strategy has a name inside the agency: vertical enforcement. The floor and the boardroom hit in the same warrant. Elegant on a whiteboard, complicated in a federal courtroom. Within 72 hours of the Grand Island raid, 3 separate legal challenges are filed. The first is a motion to suppress, filed by the meatpacking company's outside counsel, a former U.S. attorney now in private practice at a Kansas City firm, arguing the criminal search warrant swept in evidence beyond its scope. The second is a class action habeas petition filed on behalf of detained workers by the ACLU of Nebraska, arguing that expedited removal is being misapplied to individuals with more than 2 years of presence. The third comes from an unexpected direction. The Nebraska Attorney General, who files an amicus brief supporting the federal action, while simultaneously demanding that state-level unemployment insurance records not be turned over without additional process. Federalism in real time. The court challenges do not stop the operation. They slow the pipeline. They generate paper. They also produce a handful of individual reversals. 3 workers ordered released within 9 days after documentation established lawful status that the initial screening missed. 3 out of 274. A small percentage. An enormous number if you are one of the 3 or one of the 271. At DHS headquarters, the Deputy Director for HSI Worksite Operations is briefing the Secretary. The metrics from Grand Island are strong. Arrests per agent hour, high. Criminal case initiation, complete. Media coverage, mixed but survivable. The recommendation is to accelerate. The internal target, described in one planning document as aspirational but achievable, is 35 worksite operations of comparable scale by the end of fiscal year 2026. 35. In a system that ran perhaps a dozen of that scale during the entire first Trump administration. That is not a policy adjustment. That is an industrial retooling. The industries in the crosshairs are not random. Agriculture is first, particularly dairy, produce, and meat processing. Construction is second, especially framing, roofing, and drywall subcontractors. Hospitality, hotels, resorts, back-of-house restaurant staff, is third. Light manufacturing rounds out the top 4.
The common thread is a heavily immigrant labor force, often documented through staffing subcontractors that give the prime contractor a layer of plausible deniability. Vertical enforcement is designed to pierce that layer. Follow the I-9, follow the payroll, follow the wire transfer to the staffing shell. Indict everyone in the chain. Here is the one sentence in this story where the narrator will not stay neutral. A system that arrests hundreds of line workers to build a case against 3 executives is not broken. It is working exactly as designed. And that design is the choice being made. The controversial part of this story is not the raid itself. It is the quiet consensus behind it. Worksite enforcement, when polled, draws substantially higher public support than street-level arrests. Voters who oppose raids at schools and churches often support raids at plants. That gap is politically useful and operationally exploited. The internal documents are explicit about it. Public communications strategy for worksite operations emphasizes the criminal employer, the tax fraud, the labor exploitation. The 274 workers led out of the cafeteria in Grand Island are, in the department's messaging framework, incidental. In their own lives, they are not incidental at all. By the end of the first week after the raid, the numbers firm up. Of the 274 detained, 41 have been released after documentation review or humanitarian discretion. 189 are in expedited removal, most already transferred to a facility outside El Paso, some already returned across the border at Santa Teresa or Eagle Pass. 44 remain in extended detention, pending immigration court proceedings. The company has been publicly named in a superseding indictment. The plant's HR director and 2 staffing subcontractor executives are arraigned in federal court in Lincoln. The plant resumes limited operations under new management within 11 days, with a workforce hastily rebuilt through emergency staffing arrangements and, per 2 local sources, a starting wage roughly $3.40 an hour higher than before the raid. That last number is one HSI planner's circle in internal briefings. Worksite enforcement, in the agency's own analysis, is expected to produce measurable upward wage pressure in the immediate labor market around a raided facility. Whether that pressure holds, whether it is absorbed by automation, by relocation, by new hiring practices, or simply by higher prices at the grocery store, is a question economists will argue about for years. What HSI cares about, operationally, is that the pressure exists at all. It is used to justify the strategy internally and, increasingly, publicly. At the national level, the scale-up continues. In the 6 weeks following Grand Island, similar operations hit a dairy processor in Idaho, a drywall contractor network across 3 counties in Georgia, a seafood processing plant in coastal North Carolina, and a chain of car wash locations in Southern California. The car wash operation, run out of the HSI Los Angeles field office, results in the arrest of the chain's owner on charges including tax evasion and structuring under 31 U.S.C. Section 5324. The dollar figure in that case exceeds $17 million. The pattern is holding. The pattern is also generating pushback beyond the courtroom. 2 Republican senators from agricultural states, one from Idaho, one from Iowa, send a joint letter to the DHS secretary requesting a temporary pause on dairy and produce operations during harvest windows, citing food supply concerns. The letter is polite. It is also unmistakable. Enforcement at scale has costs that reach into the constituencies of the party that built the strategy. The department's response, delivered by a deputy secretary at a closed-door Capitol Hill briefing in late June, is a partial adjustment. Seasonal timing considerations will be incorporated into operational planning. The strategy will not be paused. It will be sequenced. That is what a mature enforcement architecture looks like. Not on, not off. Sequenced. Go back for a moment to that gravel parking lot outside Grand Island at 4:17 in the morning. The fog, the 23 SUVs, the supervisor with the laminated map. What was happening in that lot was not a spontaneous decision to raid a plant. It was the visible surface of a system that had been rebuilt, funded, staffed, legally prepared, and rehearsed over the preceding 18 months. The workers inside the plant were not the targets. They were the material through which the target, the corporate defendant, would be reached. That is the shift the internal documents describe, and that is the shift that ICE and HSI within it would prefer not be described too clearly in public. When the story is told as a raid, it produces one kind of reaction. When it is told as a strategic reallocation of federal criminal enforcement toward the economic infrastructure of undocumented labor, it produces a different one. The agency prefers the first framing. This channel is telling the second. The 274 workers from Grand Island are now scattered across 5 states, 3 detention facilities, and, for the ones already removed, 2 countries. The meatpacking company's stock, still traded through a parent holding company, dropped 8.7% in the 2 days following the indictment. Its legal reserve for the fiscal quarter was revised upward by $62 million. The HR director is out on bond. The 2 staffing subcontractor executives are not. A magistrate judge ruled them flight risks. In a small apartment in Grand Island, the woman called here Maribel Ortega still has that grocery receipt with the attorney's instructions on the back. Her husband came home the night of the raid because his shift had not started yet. He has not gone back to work since. Nobody in the household is sleeping well. Multiply that household by 274, then by 35 if the fiscal year target holds. Then keep multiplying, because the planning documents describe fiscal year 2027 as larger still. At 4:17 a.m. on a Tuesday in Nebraska, 23 vehicles left a gravel lot with their headlights off. By the time the sun came up, an entire model of American immigration enforcement had shifted its center of gravity from the sidewalk to the payroll. That is what ICE would prefer not be said too loudly. That is exactly what happened.